Hey, are there any other nominations? Okay, then all in favor, raise your hand. That's unanimous. So, moving on, the next item of business is approval of the minutes of the January 13th meeting. So a motion to approve.
So moved.
Is there a second? Oh, did we have a second there?
I'm happy to second.
Okay, okay, so all in favor, raise your hands. Okay, and I'll just make a comment. I thought they were excellent minutes. They're just an outstanding job, the detail, and I thought it was great. I wish all the boards and commissions had such great minutes. So,
Dylan does an excellent job.
Yeah.
Of course, he learned from an excellent minute taker as well, so.
oh, okay, well, let's pat ourselves on the back then.
Not to be picky, sorry, Alan, not to be picky, but the minutes are not titled minutes.
Oh, yeah.
No. What are they?
Dang. It got the agenda header instead of the
Oh,
minutes header.
okay. Well, the content was great though.
Yes.
Okay, so next we'll go into our business part of the meeting and I'll just describe the process we'll follow. I'll call up items for consideration and planning staff will describe what the request was, what their analysis is, and findings and recommendations. And following that, we'll allow the applicant to state their case. And following that, we'll open the public hearing for public comment from anybody in the audience. And following that, we'll close the public hearing and we will deliberate and vote either to approve or deny, possibly table the item, or maybe we'll modify it or postpone it depending on the situation. And as we do this, we'll be guided by the municipal code. We're not making new laws. We're interpreting what's in the ordinance. And that's pretty much how we process it. You know, throughout the process, if we have questions for staff, we'll ask staff. If we have questions for the applicant, we'll ask our questions. And then once we close the public comment, then the commission will deliberate and come up with their decision. So does anybody have any conflicts or ex parte contacts to disclose? Julia, did you raise your hand?
I will be excusing myself, not for the first item, but for the items on Washington Avenue. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and before we start, I'd like to, we talked about when we have things that are going to be postponed, we'll put them up front so that we can, anybody who's in the audience for those items won't have to sit through and find out at the end that, the bad news that we're not going to talk about what they're interested in. So we have, it looks like items
8, 9, and 10.
8, 9, and 10. Could we have a motion to move those to the beginning?
I'll make a motion to move items 8, 9, and 10 to the March, it's dark in here, March 16th or 18th meeting.
Well, we have to vote on it, but first we need to move them to the front of the.
Yes, that's what I said. I made a motion to move them to postpone to March, what is that, March 18th?
Yeah, Jeannie, we need to move them on the agenda before
Okay, we want to move them. Okay. Oh, we got to move them on the agenda this and then postpone them?
Yeah.
Right.
Is that what you're saying? Okay, let's move items 8. I make a motion to move items 8, 9, and 10 to the top of the agenda.
Okay, is there a second? Okay, we have a second. So all those in favor of moving these items, raise your hand. Okay, so I will now, first item of consideration. First items will be item 8, rezone 2101, low density residential to general residential. Public hearing, 6 El Paso Boulevard, Walter Harder of 6 El Paso LLC applicant. And major development plan 2101, same address and applicant, and variance 2107, a height variance, 31 feet where 25 is required at the same address.
So staff has recommended postponing to the March 10th meeting to allow us, there was a mix-up regarding public notice that needs to be cured. And that'll also allow some additional time to work with the applicant.
Okay,
I make a motion to postpone rezone 2101 and major development 2101 to the March 10th meeting.
and variance 2107.
And variance 2107, sorry about that. Same address, also to the March 10th meeting.
Okay, is there a second? Okay, we have a second, so all in favor? Okay, so that motion carries, and those items will show up on March 10th rather than February 10th. And so we'll move on then. The next item of business is variance 2102, lot coverage 70% where 50% is a maximum, 215 Pine Ridge Avenue, Larry Rice applicant.
So this is a lot coverage variance to allow 70% as was noted. It's proposed to allow the property owner to pave an approximately 12-foot by 40-foot area parallel to the street that's in the front of the home. It's currently gravel, and it's used for guest and home health aid parking and for his mother to access transportation. The property is 4,000 square feet in size, which is undersized for a single residence. In the general residential zone, that zone requires 4,400 for new development. So this is grandfathered at a smaller size. The existing home was built in 1985 and is just over 1,000 square feet in size. In addition, there's a 576 square foot detached garage on the property, and the driveway accessing the garage is located along the northern property line and is also paved in concrete. The main entrance to the home is on the south side, where a concrete walkway and ADA ramp used by the applicant's mother is also located. The existing lot coverage is 57.6%, which already exceeds the allowed limit. The application requests another 12% coverage. Note there'll be a 5-foot strip between the front property line and the existing asphalt paving that's actually within the right-of-way of Pine Ridge. So that area will also be paved to connect to the street and to allow for removal of a degraded asphalt berm, but that's not counted as part of the lot's coverage because it's actually off of the applicant's property. So as the Planning Commission is aware, you may authorize variances from the code. A variance is an extraordinary remedy, and endorsement of the variance by adjacent landowners doesn't relieve the applicant from meeting the requirements. And the variance criteria is what needs to be met. So criteria number one, I'm just going to read staff's responses to that, not each of the criteria individually. So number one, the application states the area proposed for paving has always been utilized for parking, but the gravel surface is problematic for his elderly mother, who's limited mobility. Visitors experience issues with slipping on loose gravel, muddy conditions, and tracking gravel into the walkway and into the home and vehicles. The application also notes the area is subject to stormwater incursion from Pine Ridge, and installation of the proposed improvement would provide better stormwater controls from the street and alleviate a tripping hazard for pedestrians along Pine Ridge. The application cites the adjacent property at 301 Pine Ridge as utilizing the same paving to both create stormwater controls and provide additional off-street parking for the home. Staff notes the small lot size exacerbates the higher than allowed and unusual lot coverage. With the modest home size, the existing garage, and paved driveway and walkway areas, there's no area remaining for additional impervious surface that would not trigger a variance. The mobility needs of a resident of the property and the desired improvement to control stormwater entering the property are considerations when examining the variance. Certainly, the area in front of the home could be used in other pervious manner, but that would not meet the needs of the residents or address safe access to the property. Staff finds the application and evaluation provides sufficient justification, excuse me, to meet the criterion. Number 2, the application indicates there's no other area available for additional off-street parking. Staff notes, although there is parking available on the long, narrow driveway, stacking of vehicles in that area does not meet the needs of the applicant's mother's access to transportation, and requiring home health workers to park on the driveway would cause more vehicle movements as cars needed to be moved and reparked in order to let other vehicles in and out of the property. Certainly, if the proposed paving is denied, the area can still be used for parking, but the issues noted by the applicant would continue and become less safe over time. So staff finds the application provides sufficient justification to meet the criteria. Number 3, the application states there are only 3 properties in this area of Pine Ridge with driveways, one of which is his. The other 2 properties have pavement that connects their driveways to the street. The applicant's driveway pavement does not continue to the west and connect with the street. It's part of this gap area. The proposed paving along the front of the home is identical to the property south of this subject property, although that property is larger, so the paved area is more substantial. The applicant's provided photos of his property that also show that concrete area in front of 301 Pine Ridge. Staff finds although the majority of properties in the immediate area may not have off-street parking, the application provides sufficient justification and documentation to illustrate that other properties with driveways have improvements similar to what's being requested. Number 4, the applicant indicates he has no knowledge of any issues that would make this application questionable, i.e. would be a violation of the code. Staff's also not aware of any code violations or a previously granted variance that resulted in this request. The applicant proposes to comply with the city's code through this variance. Staff finds there's sufficient justification to meet the criterion. Number 5, the application states the proposed paving would have no effect on other properties. No views would be obstructed and the paving would not interfere with the use of the public park or residence on either side of the subject property. Staff also notes reasonable protections for adjacent properties can be provided by the public hearing process itself. The required mailed notice was sent to surrounding property owners within 200 feet of the subject property. The property was posted and the request advertised as required by city code. Staff received the comment from adjacent owner across the street as is listed in the report. No adverse comments or negative recommendations have been made by city departments or outside agencies. There was some initial concern by CSU, but the applicant provided additional information regarding the location of utility lines, and they support approval of the request. Staff finds that criterion number 5 has been addressed by the application. Number 6, the application states the existing conditions are unsightly and detract from the area. Improvement of the area appears to be supported by neighbors and can cause and will not cause an undesirable change to the area. Although more paving might not be something staff would personally propose, the applicant has good reasons to do this, and staff agrees the additional concrete would conform with what's in place next door. The applicant has also provided information on stormwater that shows his property would be better protected, but there would be no additional stormwater put into Pine Ridge from his property. Staff finds the application meets criterion number 6. Number 7, the application states the application is a result of observing the spirit of the code. The elimination of the public tripping hazard by replacement of the existing degraded asphalt berm is an additional benefit of the proposed improvement that benefits public safety and welfare. The variance has no impact on adjacent properties, and the process itself protects the other owners. Staff notes substantial justice may also be considered treating the applicant's property the same as other properties in the area. So staff finds the application sufficiently addresses and meets criteria number 7. So staff recommends, based on the information provided and the evaluation in the staff report, approval of V2102 to allow installation of approximately 400 square feet of concrete paving along the front of 215 Pine Ridge Avenue for a total lot coverage of not more than 70%, where 50% is allowed, with the finding sufficient justification has been provided in the application to establish conformance with criteria 1 through 7 as required by section 1832-030A of the Manitou Springs zoning code. I did, with some discussion that we had at a staff meeting this afternoon, realize that I should have put a condition. It's more of informational because it would still be required, and I anticipated that the applicant, we would need to run his plan and coordinate with public services, since part of the concrete would go out into the right of way. There's that 5-foot strip. We want to make sure that that's coordinated with them. And so I am proposing a condition that says installation of concrete and replacement of asphalt berm in the right of way will require review and coordination with Manitou Springs Public Services. Public Services is aware. They did respond to a request for comments and had no problems with what they were seeing, but as part of the permitting process, we'll want to just make sure they look at the plans and that they're comfortable with the mechanics of how this is going to operate.
Thank you. Any questions for staff? Okay. With that, if there's no questions, can we bring the applicant into the panel? Okay, could you state your name and address for the record?
You're muted, Larry. I can see that your microphone's muted. Larry, if you can hear me, if you put your cursor in the box with everybody's pictures in it, and you'll see a microphone in the lower, well, mine's on the lower left, and it'll have a slash through it. If you click there, it'll unmute you.
Can we unmute?
Oh,
Okay.
no.
Have you got me?
Yeah, and you're welcome to turn on video if you'd like to have video.
I had that on and now I don't.
Well, it should be right somewhere in there. You should see a start video option.
There I am.
There you are.
Wow, what an
Okay.
ugly cuss.
Now, come on. So, do you have any thoughts on the staff recommendations?
No, to start with, my name is Larry Rice, 215 Pine Ridge Avenue. I don't really have anything more to add. I have more comments that I could put in, but they were just more embellishment on what you've already heard.
Okay. Well,
I
go on.
appreciate what they've said.
Okay, any questions for the applicant? Okay, thanks. If you have, if you're comfortable with everything, then we'll move on. And if we have more questions for you, we'll bring you back.
Okay, that sounds good to me.
Thanks,
Okay,
Larry.
Thank you.
thanks. Now, would anybody in the audience like to comment on this? If you do, just raise your hand and we'll bring you over. Okay, let's see, I don't see anybody raising their hands, so we'll close the public comment and we're at the table. Someone would like to comment or make a motion or,
No brainer.
are you making a motion, Mike?
No, Jeannie was about to. She's on a roll.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I'll make a motion. I did have a question, though.
Oh,
I just, because of the way the variance reads in making this motion, that is only for cement. It can't possibly be used in the future to add on to the house.
No, it's just for the paving.
Okay, I'll make a motion to approve variance 2102. Lot coverage 70% where 50% is the maximum.
and with the added recommendation that Michelle made for an additional condition.
Yes, yes.
Okay, is there a second? Okay, we have a second, Tip seconded. And so any discussion? Since there's no discussion, then all those in favor can raise a hand to vote yes. Okay, and that's unanimous. And so this one is done. There's no council hearing or anything, so.
Nope.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And so now we'll move on to items 5, 6, and 7. Variance 2103, front yard setback 7 where 15 is required. 106 Washington Avenue, Mark Gilliland of Cornerstone Design Builds Ltd. applicant on behalf of Jason Rash, owner. Item 6, variance 2104, side yard setback 5 feet where 7.6 is required. The same address and same applicant. And item 7, variance 2105, a rear yard setback 10 feet where 15 is required. Same address and same applicant.
So this is for front, rear, and
No,
side
wait,
yard setback.
Sorry,
sorry.
just to clarify, and Julia, you're recusing on this one. Okay, thank you.
Just making a note of that. Right, so this is for a front, side, and rear yard setback variances. The applications were postponed in January to allow the applicant to respond to issues that were raised in the previous staff report and concerns raised by the property owner to the south on Lafayette. The existing house on the property was built in approximately 1909 and is about 2,900 square feet. It's 5 bedrooms, 3.5 baths. The house has been added onto and remodeled to the extent that it no longer contributes to the historic district. The updated design and orientation of the proposed detached garage was re-reviewed and approved last week at the February 3rd Historic Preservation Commission meeting. An administrative minor subdivision has also been requested to create a whole single lot, and that's in process. The existing property is over 13,000 square feet in size with a single dwelling, which more than complies with the lot size density allowed in the zone district that requires a minimum 4,400 square foot lot for a single unit. Much of the property to the south and east of the home features steep slopes that have been terraced and are not feasible for garage construction, and there are no additional dwelling units proposed. The garage has been slightly reduced in size from 22 feet deep by 30 feet wide at 660 square feet to the currently requested 22 feet by 28 feet wide or 616 square feet. The footprint reduction still allows for a workshop or workout area in addition to the 2-car parking. Originally, both existing sheds and a pergola on the site were to be removed. However, the revised site plan shows the shed closest to Washington Avenue will remain. That might be something that you want to confirm with the applicant, but it looked to me that the demo notation on there had been removed. The updated site plan shows the gas and electrical lines adjacent to the proposed construction. As was noted in the previous staff report, Colorado Springs Utilities requires a specific horizontal distance to each of the lines, 10 foot to the overhead electric and 6 foot to the gas line. Staff measured those distances on the current site plan and found the garage is 9 feet from both electrical and gas lines. CSU also requires a 10-foot vertical distance from the building to the electrical line, which staff would not be able to verify. That's something the applicant will have to provide information on for CSU review and approval as part of the permitting if this is approved. Based on the site plan, it appears the building must be reduced by another foot on the north-south dimension to meet the requirements to the electric line for a 21-foot building dimension and an 8-foot front setback. So in regard to the variance criteria, number 1, the application states adherence of the code would cause a hardship as the garage will provide off-street parking and enhance the property's value. Staff agrees there's no other location on the property within which to construct a garage due to the configuration of the property, the existing development, and the limited available area outside of steep slopes. So staff finds the application provides sufficient justification to meet criteria 1. Number 2, the revised application states there are no new design or no design alternatives that would eliminate or reduce the proposed variances based on the above referenced circumstances on the site. The revised proposal does reduce the size of the building and increases the proposed setbacks. As noted above, it appears the garage would need to be reduced to 21 feet by 28 feet to meet the distance requirement to adjacent utility lines. This results in setbacks of 8-foot front, 5-foot side, and 10-foot rear. As noted previously, since variances are requested for all the setbacks applicable to the construction, reducing the size of the garage was justified. A single car garage could be constructed with potentially less impacts on setbacks. However, staff understands the benefits of creating a 2-car garage, so supports consideration of at least a minimal 2-car footprint. The changes as now proposed have significantly increased the rear yard setback from 4 feet, which was what the original proposal was, to 10 feet. The rear setback is the most sensitive due to the immediately adjacent home. Given the current orientation, however, the depth, which is that north-south dimension at 21 feet, is basically at the minimum to accommodate most vehicles. Further reduction of the east-west dimension to eliminate the workout area has no impact on the rear setback, which is the most critical area of separation. Staff believes the proposal is correct in that there's no other feasible area on the property for location of the garage given the conditions as noted under criteria 1, and staff finds with the adjustments noted, there's sufficient justification to meet the criteria. Under item 3, the application states there are other properties with garages in this area which don't meet setbacks and provides some photos of those improvements. Upper Washington Avenue to the west of the property generally features larger lots, and even on these properties, it doesn't appear garages meet all setbacks. In the more immediate area surrounding this property, lots become smaller and more constrained by topography. Garages in this immediate area may be smaller and also don't appear to meet setbacks. So staff finds the application provides justification to meet criteria number 3. Number 4, the application simply restates the criteria with no real evaluation or justification. The request isn't related to a code violation or previously granted variance. Staff does not believe the reference to the quote-unquote actions of the applicant refers to the general desire to improve property. If that was the case, then no one would be able to qualify for a variance that requested relief for something such as a garage. Staff believes this criteria refers to the details of a request. If the commission agrees with staff that desiring a 2-car garage, especially when related to a house of the size on this property, is reasonable, then some level of variance is necessary to achieve that. Staff finds there's sufficient justification to meet criterion 4. Number 5, the application states the code compliant construction affords adjacent property protection, and other garages have been constructed similarly without adverse impacts. Staff notes reasonable protection for adjacent properties can be provided by the public hearing process itself, and the required mail notice was sent to surrounding property owners within 200 feet of the subject property. The property was posted and the request advertised as required by city code. Planning staff received initial comments opposing the request from owners of 124 Lafayette, which is directly south of 106 Washington. Information on the revised application was provided to those owners who continue to raise concerns, including adverse impact to their property values and regarding potential geologic hazards. Staff has provided both the initial and follow-up comments following this staff report in your packet. Staff believes the increased rear setback substantially improves the relationship between the two properties and reduces the chance for impacts on the neighboring property. The city's code requires at a minimum a Tier 1 geologic hazards evaluation for the structure to be permitted. Should the engineer / geologist determine there are any concerns regarding stability or additional mitigation necessary, those steps will be recommended or additional geologic evaluation required to provide proper mitigation and to confirm that the construction as proposed is suitable and the adjacent property is protected. The city also requires drainage from the property not increase from historic flows. A condition of any approval should it require drainage be improved and directed away from both 124 Lafayette and Lafayette Road. No adverse comments or negative recommendations have been made by city departments or outside agencies. Colorado Springs Utilities will need to confirm that the distance requirements are met as part of any building permit process. Staff finds the criterion is addressed by the application and staff's revisions to the proposal. Number 6, the application indicates the proposed garage will not impede views and with new retaining walls and grading to create proper drainage as planned, downhill properties will be protected. Staff notes there's a pergola structure and one storage shed that will be eliminated by the garage construction. The one storage shed to be removed is visible in the photos submitted by the applicant, angled at the southwestern corner of the property and sited on the stone retaining wall next to 124 Lafayette. Currently, there are stacked stone and rubble walls along Lafayette and between this and the adjacent property. The proposal calls for replacement of the stone walls with engineered concrete retaining walls. The Historic Preservation Commission required the stone from the wall along Lafayette and the southern lot line to be reused to clad any new wall to retain the historic appearance to the street from the home on Lafayette. Staff finds the intentions indicated in the application with the changes that have been provided, including additional rear setback, and with conditions addressing drainage to the west and south of the proposed garage, the proposal meets this criterion. Number 7, the application states the spirit of the code is being observed as neighbors' views and parking on street are considered in the proposal. Public safety and welfare are secured due to increased construction quality of the new garage and retaining wall compared to what is existing. And substantial justice will be done by treating the subject property similarly to others in the area. Staff suggests the construction of new retaining walls and directing site drainage can improve the existing conditions on the site in relation to impacts to adjacent property and the public road. Increasing the proposed rear setback to 10 feet increases the distance to the house south of the property and will be further away than the existing shed and fence. Note there's no setback required for a retaining wall. And a new wall will need to be part of the geologic hazards evaluation and engineered. So they not only have to address the geologist or engineer not only has to look at the actual garage site, but also needs to consider the retaining wall construction as well. No geologic hazard evaluation or requirement for drainage improvements would occur should the proposal be denied. So again, under the changes proposed and conditions as recommended, staff finds the proposal meets the above criterion. Garage construction will require a wildfire mitigation evaluation by the fire department, which is provided free of charge prior to issuance of a property improvement permit. There's no floodplain on this property, so no need for a floodplain permit. So staff recommends approval of V2103, V2104, and V2105 at 106 Washington Avenue, with the finding that sufficient justification has been provided for the criterion as required and under the following conditions. 1, a front yard setback of not less than 8 feet from the property line to provide a minimum 10 foot from the existing overhead electric transmission line in Washington Avenue shall be provided. 2, a side yard setback of not less than 5 feet from the side property line adjacent to Lafayette Road shall be provided. 3, a rear yard setback of not less than 10 feet from the rear property line shall be provided. 4, the required tier 1 at a minimum geologic hazards report shall be provided prior to issuance of any permits for construction. And 5, a stormwater and drainage plan shall be submitted and approved, which shows site drainage directed away from the private property to the south and Lafayette Road prior to issuance of any permits for construction. You have some photos following the staff report in the packet, and you've got both some elevation drawings and a site plan that was also provided as part of the packet. I'm willing to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions for staff? Carrie?
Dylan, did you have a follow-up on that question I'd asked on Monday?
Sorry,
About
what?
the question about the pad?
Yeah, so you were included on that email chain. I don't have specifics. We did send the code enforcement officer out to document. They took photos. It does appear that the pad went in 2019. There's a photo that shows an inscription in the concrete that says Rash 2019. It was not reviewed or permitted by the planning department.
Just
Yes,
so everybody else knows, I went to look at the property and noticed that they had a 3-car pad freshly poured and wondered how that, when they were talking about needing off-street parking, it holds, they had 3 cars parked on it when I went by to look at it. Just so you understand the question I'm asking.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there are obvious, that's going to need to be reviewed because I don't think public services looked at it. And I think there's a manhole right there. So that's something we need to follow up with the property owner regarding. But yeah, I mean, they would have more than required parking, which is probably not a terribly bad thing in that area, but that's, yeah, so they do have some off-street parking, and that is an area that's been used by this property for parking for quite a long time.
Any other questions, Carrie? Are you good?
Well, I'll ask when we're discussing stuff. That was just one specifically, yeah.
Okay, Tip, you had your hand up.
Thank you. I was wondering, Michelle, if you could tell us, one, how many square feet the exercise workshop area of the garage is. And I understand that it wouldn't have an impact on the rear setback, but what the impact on other setbacks would be if that were not part of the package.
Sure. Well, a very minimal 2-car garage is 20 by 20. And that can be problematic at times to get really large vehicles into. And with the requirement to separate the garage doors, the historic district requirement, you might need to do like 20 by 22, is more of a minimum. And so this is 28. So, you could say up to 6 feet is surplus. I would certainly want the applicant to talk a little bit more about that as well. But that just looking at some very minimals dimensions. So if the shed that was previously proposed for removal is still going to be removed, then they could move the building over closer to the house and probably get the full 7.5 foot setback in. Because they've reduced the building by a couple of feet, it looked to me like the shed was no longer proposed for removal because they weren't going to have as much room in the garage as they anticipated. But again, we want the applicant to confirm all of that. And so there is the possibility that if I'm going to call it east-west dimension was reduced, if it could be reduced by another, 2.5 feet, they would be able to meet the setback requirement.
And Michelle, if that whole garage building shifted towards their house, it also would make it, if those two, as I'm looking at the land, the plan, the shed and the pergola, if that shifted to the right, then they'd only need a front yard variance. Is that right? If it shifted towards their house?
No, they would still have to have the front and rear, but they wouldn't need the side. Because the property widens back out in back of the house,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't carry over west far enough toward Lafayette. That's where the other property is, in that notch. So they would still require a rear yard setback.
And the distance from the front of the property, I'm just looking at the plan here.
Sure.
Okay, never mind. That answers my question.
Okay.
Other questions? Mike?
Michelle, are the neighbors at 124 Lafayette aware of the changes from between
Yes.
last month?
Yeah, I sent those to them
Mirrored.
myself. And we got a follow-up email that was included in the application or in the staff report.
Well, that
So
was
you-
dated, that's from January.
Well, there's the January one, and then there's also the one that came in, what was it, last week? So if you
February
look on
3rd.
the back of that January, you'll see one from Teddy Stabler.
Right?
That's the follow-up, February 3rd. And that's after I had sent the revised plans.
Okay.
So
Michelle,
No
Gary?
comment from Leslie Kingman?
Wait, Gary.
No,
Any more questions, Mike?
No, thank you.
Okay, Carrie, you had another?
well, wouldn't we need to take that paved section into consideration for the area covered on the lot now?
for lot coverage?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that will be considered, but I can tell you they're not anywhere close to the 50% lot coverage.
Okay.
That's such a big lot.
Okay, I have a couple questions. One, when you look at the elevations, the front, rear, and so on, below the doors, there are two rectangular areas. Is that like footer or something below grade, below surface, or what is that?
Looks like it's a foundation to me.
Okay. And what is the height of the garage?
Above grade.
Yes.
Well, it's a single story, but I don't have the actual height on here. So we should ask the applicant that.
Sure. Okay. And let's see, my other question, the reason that the closest, the setback, the maximum, the minimum setback required in front is 8 feet because of the electrical service, right?
Yeah, but according to what I measured off,
Yeah. So is that based on, that's vertical separation from the electrical, or?
that's horizontal separation.
Okay,
I don't have any way of really
sure.
figuring out vertical. They're gonna have to work that out with CSU.
Okay, but they also have a requirement that's going to be vertical with CSU.
Yeah.
But clearly, if it was a lower garage, it would still have to be pushed back 8 horizontally.
Yes.
Okay, my other question, you mentioned that the drainage, any alteration in the flow and the drainage needs to be diverted away from the property to the south or to Lafayette Avenue. Where else could it go?
We'd go to Washington.
Just out onto the street?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's kind of normal for that kind of drainage.
Okay. Okay, any other questions for staff before we move on? Okay, if we can bring the applicant in now. Oh, he seems to have disappeared.
There he is.
Oh, there he is.
Okay. Okay, let's see, do you have you're muted and you can turn on your video too?
All right, I'll try the video. Our internet is pretty bad out here tonight, so if I come across rough on the audio, let me know and I'll shut the video off.
Okay. Okay, you look good there. We see you.
Coming in.
Mark.
Okay. There
Could
we
you
go. Hi.
state
How you doing?
start by stating your name and address for the record?
Yep, Mark Gilliland, 11005 South Holmes Road, Colorado Springs, Colorado, 80908.
Okay. So your thoughts on the discussion so far in the staff report?
Michelle covered most of it. A couple things to add. He is willing to take down that other shed if there's enough storage. So just wants to make sure that he's got enough room for other things. And if he does, between the pergola and the 2 sheds, we would end up removing as much roof space as we'd be adding approximately. I don't have exact numbers, but just for what that's worth. So we'd get stuff out of there. One more thing about the utilities, I noticed Colorado Springs Utilities told me it was 10 foot radially, which at the 7 foot setback we meet with no problem. It's 12 or 13 according to our measurements. But if it is horizontally, then yeah, we'd have to go to 8 foot setback there. So maybe we could double check that, because 21 feet is going to make it pretty tight for his larger vehicle, but if he has to, he could squeeze in there.
Yeah, what the comments that they sent me said horizontal and vertical, not radial. So I can, but it certainly that would need to be clarified with them.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
I think they replied via email, so I can check for that and send it to you if that's in fact what it is, unless I got something wrong. I don't think there's a whole lot else to add. I think somebody had a question in there that I didn't write down.
Tip, did you have a question?
Well, I had asked about the impact of removing the workspace and exercise space, and Michelle answered it, but she also suggested that the applicant might want to address that.
Yeah, I mean, the workout space is really a key component to what he wants to do in there. It would really change everything what he's trying to accomplish. So he wouldn't want to do that if at all possible. That would not make him happy. But I could talk to him about it and see if he has any other options. Yep, Michelle.
Could I ask a question?
Yes, Michelle.
If he removed that second shed, then the garage could be shifted over toward the house another 2.5 feet, which would then meet the side setback. Would you agree that that's a feasible?
Yeah,
That's
if
feasible?
necessary, if that really helps, that could be done.
Okay. Any
He'd
other
rather
questions?
take up more of the backyard than lose size of the garage.
Sure.
But he also wants to leave a little bit of backyard if he can. So
Other questions? Okay, what is the height like from the ground to the eaves of that garage?
yeah, so standard 9-foot wall heights, and then the roof. And
Okay.
based on the pitch, it'll be approximately 3.25 feet to the peak on top of the 9 feet. But that'll be in the center, of course.
Okay. Okay. Do you have anything else you'd like to add before we move on to the public comment?
Nope. Everything else I heard sounded pretty good. I mean, yeah, we could drain to the front, would be easy enough. And probably by shifting the garage over, Michelle, we probably would not touch that wall on Lafayette. We wouldn't need to get into that. In the last meeting we had, we were thinking we might have to excavate and make room, and we might have to rebuild that wall on Lafayette, but we probably wouldn't even have to touch it if we're even at the 5-foot setback we're at now. But if we shifted it over to the 7.5, then we for sure would be far enough out of the way. It would just remain as is. I think that's about the only other things I can think of.
Okay. Are there any other questions for the applicant before we move on? Okay, thank you. We'll call you back when we have more, if we have more questions.
Okay, thanks.
Great. Okay, so the public comment period is open now. We have a hand raised. Okay, you can turn on your video and microphone and
Okay, start video. There.
okay, great. Could you start by stating your name and address for the record?
Okay. I'm Leslie Kingman, and I'm co-owner of 124 Lafayette Road, though I'm not living there right now.
And you live at, what's your address that you live at?
409 Washington Avenue.
Okay, thanks. Okay, you
Hi,
have
Mike.
the
You
floor.
told me 409.
Okay. Okay, the floor is yours.
Okay. So I just want to say what it feels like at 124 Lafayette, which at one time was about the only house on that hillside. We have an old picture where nothing else was there and that house was there. Is that like their house looms totally over our house, and then they want to put a garage that looms totally over the back of it. It feels like, you know, those pictures of the little house in New York City with the skyscrapers all around it. How are we gonna know how this geo assessment thing works about testing the you know, whether this is gonna cause a landslide onto our property? And how are we going to be informed about that? It still just feels like they're talking about improving their property value, but it's lowering the property value of 124 Lafayette.
Yeah, Michelle, could you explain how that process will work with the geotechnical report?
Sure. So when we get a geotechnical report in, both staff reviews it and we also send it to our consulting engineer for their review to make sure it says what we think it says, and that that the geologic engineer or geologist looked at the right area and just to check it out and make sure the report's adequate. And in those reports, they will state whether the proposed construction is appropriate, if there are potential issues, if it shouldn't be constructed in the area proposed, or how to mitigate if they need any kind of special foundation work or need to stay out of certain areas or that type of thing. You can certainly obtain a copy of it. It's public information when it comes into the office. And if the report says that it's not an acceptable location, or there's issues that can't reasonably be mitigated, then we can't issue the permit.
Okay. I would think that would already be done. So this process right now it's still before issuing a permit.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, they've not gone through the permit process because they wouldn't be able to without knowing where the garage is going to sit on the property.
Yeah.
And that also informs any geohazards reporting, their building plans, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So this really is kind of the first step.
Well, of course, my preference would be that they not build a big honking garage up there. But I would just say shifting it a little bit towards their house. Yeah, it's still right above our property, but it might leave a little bit more room on the west side of the property where it's not totally looming over the house.
Any questions for Leslie? I'm curious, there's that storage thing that's right there on your property, on the property line.
Yeah.
How will that impact if that is removed? Or is that really non-consequential?
Well, that isn't that big, that storage shed. So it doesn't feel like I don't know.
Yeah.
It's not the size of a garage.
Sure. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Okay. Okay, is there anything else you'd like to add?
I think Teddy is listening to the meeting. I don't know if she has anything she also wants to say.
If she wants to raise her hand, then she'd be welcome to speak. Okay, well, thank you. Okay, would anybody else in the audience like to speak on this item before we close public comment? Okay, I don't see any other hands raised, so we'll close public comment. And we have to figure out what to do. We go around and get people's thoughts before we make a motion on this. It's a pretty tricky one. So, Tip?
I think it's a tricky one. Part of, so I already raised the issue about the exercise space. I don't really see that there has to be some kind of principle about why certain kinds of desired space would be allowed to have a variance and other spaces wouldn't. It could be that someone would want to put a a dance hall in, or a movie studio or something. I'm being exaggerating, but wanting to do something doesn't necessarily mean that that has to be part of the equation. So I do think that that space should be either eliminated or greatly reduced and moved so that one of the variances would not have to be granted, one of the three. So that would be that. I do feel strongly about that. In the report, there are, in trying to think through the logic here, there are a couple things that I have to, that for me, I sort of have to remove in my thinking, in determining. So for example, that the applicant asked for much, much more to begin with and has compromised down, to me, I guess ultimately is a little bit immaterial. I'm not saying that, I'm just trying to figure out what factors I'm going to look at most and trying to come to a determination. But you could ask to put the Empire State Building on there and then reduce it to a 10-foot tall thing or whatever and say, well, I've gone, like so far. And to me, that's irrelevant. Like what we have in front of us is what really I think we have to be considering. And the other thing that I kind of have to put a little bit to side is, although I think it's a little bit more meaningful, is the extent to which there are other properties in the neighborhood that might have similar situations. I could imagine that the other properties would matter quite a bit if what you were trying to do was exceptional vis-a-vis them and trying to get a huge variance about it. But the other way, if this being Manitou, other properties have done things in the past before things got more standardized and regularized, and that we had a stronger code, then I suppose when you get a house, then the idea is you buy that house knowing what the regulations are. And whether other properties do or do not conform to that, to me, is a little bit secondary. So that I don't think is such a, so for me, like when you cut to the chase a little bit here, then the issue seems to me about the fair use of a property that's large, with a large house and with standards, whether it's appropriate to have a 2-car garage. And in that way, I kind of lean to that that's a reasonable use. Like putting other things in, I'm less sympathetic to. But a 2-car garage for this kind of property where there's space, then if the geological hazards report checked out and all that. So at this point, not having heard you guys speak, but at this point, I would be open to that. That's sort of where my thinking is right now.
Okay, Jean?
You're muted, Ginny.
There we go. I was trying to get it unmuted. I wholeheartedly agree with what Tip said. I'm feeling the very same way. I think I agree, and I think it reasonable to allow a 2-car garage. Although many of us have a no-car garage or a 1-car garage, and in Manitou, it's very, very common, no matter what the size of the house is, to have no garage. But I sympathize on the part for a 2-car garage. Really don't have much sympathy for a workout space or a whatever. I do agree with what Tip said. You can, I can decide I want to put a windmill and a pump room and building in front of my property. No, we don't allow that, and that's wishful thinking. And then I could have my own well system and not have to pay for water, and that's all well and good, but I live in Manitou. And I just think there's certain things when you live in Manitou that you just have to be accepting of. I think it's, and I also think asking for a rear yard, front yard, and side yard variance is a lot. I mean, there's reason we have guidelines, and to ask for a variance in the first place is one thing, but ask for 3, I I definitely would have to nix the work area space, not in agreement with the workout area, I can see maybe the 2-car garage, but I think it needs to be moved by the house so that at least they're only asking for 2 variances instead of 3. Just think that's too much, and you know, like I say, I think many people in Manitou, I almost think we'd be setting a precedent that I am not in favor of by approving it and saying, oh yeah, well, he wanted a workout area. Well, I'd like to have a garage on the front of my property, so maybe I tear down the historic wall so I could put one in. I don't think so. I just don't think I think you have to agree with certain things. When you live in Manitou, there's certain things you just have to be accepting of, or don't live here. So.
Other thoughts? Carrie?
Yeah, I guess when I'm reading through the thing with, when I'm reading through their checklist, the homeowner's checklist, saying that their number one thing was, we want to allow us to park more than 1 car off the street. And then knowing that they've put in a pad already where they can park 3 cars. And then they're asking now for, and that was off on the side that they didn't approve. And now they're asking for additional 2 cars in a garage plus something extra. It kind of just set me off the wrong way. I think when I went and walked the property and looked at the neighbors in Lafayette and how that garage is going to be set, I do think that if the homeowner wants a 2-car garage, we don't need the extra size for the exercise room. Plus, I think the homeowner should take that garage closer to their house, so it does cut down on some of that looming feeling along Lafayette. When you make that turn down off of Washington onto Lafayette, I mean, those houses, you know, every house in the neighborhood is relatively small. The house already there is large, and another large building going on to that site just really just doesn't seem to fit there.
Mike, do you have any thoughts?
Well, I agree with all the above, especially the fact that there's a 2,900 square foot house. I think they can find an area to work out, and they've got plenty of storage. I think that they should just be a little bit more inconvenienced versus what they're hoping for. And the setback to the west, just like Carrie said, should be respected, and the garage should be moved more towards the house. And if they lose a little bit of their yard, that's how it is. But I appreciate the want and desire for a 2-car garage. I would too. But they're trying to put a round peg in a square hole. So I think with some maneuvering of the garage and making it smaller, comfortable enough to park 2 good-sized vehicles would solve some problems.
Yeah. I have a question for you, Michelle.
Okay.
If they undergrounded the electrical, would that change the issue with the front setback, or would that just put it underground and they'd still have to be 8 feet away from it or whatever?
I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. It probably would not. I mean, the underground gas line has a setback from it. I don't know whether it would still be 10 feet or if it would be less if it's underground. I'm not sure.
Okay. And you had a comment you wanted to make before I?
Well, I was just going to suggest some changes to the staff recommendation that conform to what I think I'm hearing.
Well, you haven't heard from me yet, so
Okay.
why don't you wait?
Okay.
So my thoughts are, I just absolutely cannot support the side yard setback. I think it's, I agree. It's asking for something that's, not everybody has a workout room or a big storage area in their 2-car garage, especially in that neighborhood. And I don't anyway want to support that. Ironically, the one that's can't really be messed with much is the front one, You know, I walked all around that neighborhood, walked down Lincoln, and almost every garage has like at most a 2-foot setback from the pavement. So that would have been my solution. I am just, I've struggled with this, and to me, the being on a hill and not respecting the rear setback is really not fair to the downhill neighbor. I think a lot of the reason we have setbacks where they're most pertinent are in cases like that. It's, you know, it's already to have someone right uphill from you, anything's going to be lurking over you. And then if we reduce the setback, that just, you know, that really hurts the person downhill. And that's, you know, one of those criteria is impact on the surrounding area. And as much as I understand the desire to have a garage, I have a real hard time supporting that, you know, doing that to the downhill neighbors. It kills me to think that, you know, we'd be, you know, putting that big hulking thing, you know, there's already, you know, I'm sure it predated our zoning code that that house was built in the first place so close to the other one with no setback. And you know, I struggled to find some other solution, like perhaps allowing at least a car, you know, carport or something on where that pad is, or something else, or some other reconfiguration. But I haven't gotten to the point where I'm comfortable supporting that rear setback. You know, and I thought like, well, if we reduced it to a 20-foot, that's still like moving that garage 4 feet closer to the neighbors. And, you know, maybe if the whole thing was pushed over to where it was adjacent to the house, it wouldn't be as awful. But I'm just really struggling with supporting it. So the floor is yours, Michelle.
Well, I was just gonna recommend if it sounds like pretty much everybody is in favor of denial of the side yard setback. And so I was gonna recommend that basically the wording be denial of V2104 for the side yard setback. And that the setback be provided by the reduction of the building size or moving the building closer to the house. If they meet the setback, what they do as far as, you know, internally to the property, one way or another, they can meet the setback that way. And then depending on if the commission wants to approve the front and back setback variances, then it would be, and then approval of V2103 and V2105 as I've got in the staff recommendation. And then I would take condition number 2, because again, that talks about the side yard setback, and then I take that out and then just renumber the other conditions.
Kip?
One thing, Michelle, that I'm not sure about, so I'm just gonna put this out there, but I understand what you were saying, that if we denied the side setback, then the way they do it could be the way they did it. One thing you said earlier was that you could have a 2-car garage that would be comfortable to come into if you got rid of 6 feet running instead of the 8 feet, 6 feet running. I think that's what you said. And I wonder, but the thing is that they could meet the rear setback by only getting rid of 3 feet of that, let's say. But if they got rid of the 6 feet, then that would reduce the mass in a way. I mean, because what they're trying to do is what the application is suggesting is to cut off 5 feet of the rear setback, 5 feet, right? But if you do reduce the mass of, so that I sympathize with their neighbor, that like this looming thing, and there's going to be this other thing. But if you got rid of the other outlying buildings and you reduced it by 6 feet, then it would be less obtrusive. Isn't that right? So the
Potentially, yeah, I mean, yes. I can tell you though that, if they were doing an addition onto the building, as long as it met setbacks, we wouldn't be able to keep that from happening.
And
So
you can't do a condition, say, we'll grant the setback with the condition that you do this, reduce this other dimension.
I don't know how to answer that. I don't know whether that's appropriate or not. I don't know whether we have that authority.
Okay. Carrie?
Michelle, I was interesting when I was looking into this, the Zillow had the property at like 30, I don't have it up right now, 3,400 square feet, 3,800 square feet, something like that. And isn't there a limit on size on a single family residence of 4,400 square feet or something in that area?
That's the lot size.
Oh, it's the lot. I was thinking of the house
Yeah.
size. Okay.
Yeah, not the building size. There's no limit on that. Yeah, I wish I had, the answers. I just, I suppose you could make whatever motion you're going to make. And if for some reason it's determined that restricting the internal size, the size of the garage internally, where it doesn't impact the setbacks, if that, if that holds up, then great. If it doesn't, then maybe we come back.
What do you mean if it holds up?
Well, if maybe Jeff Parker advises that, yeah, it's perfectly reasonable. I just haven't had that question come up before where I can say, yes, you can, and you can keep them from connecting it to the house.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually remember a long time ago when there was someone wanting a setback variance across the street from me, and I asked that question, and you said that, no, we can't even dictate what kind of materials they use.
Right. I just think it might make you feel better in this moment, but the fact is I don't know how enforceable ultimately, because they could come back and propose, like I said, a connection on the garage to the house and fill that gap in. And as long as it met setbacks, we couldn't keep it from happening.
One more question. Now, I know this also went through HPC.
Yes.
And if we attempted to force some kind of change to the size, dimensions, and location, would that have to go back through HPC?
I don't think you'd be talking about changes that were substantial enough. It would still look substantially like the same building, it would be a little closer to the house, but those aren't substantial changes where you would really notice them from the HPC purview.
Okay. Mike?
I don't think we should be worried about changes in their design or their plans. The issue is the setbacks. So maybe an option is just the writing is on the wall where this is going. Maybe we should just postpone a decision and give them the opportunity to redesign and come back with a more reasonable solution. Maybe a one-car garage. It's probably painful to hear, but it's life. Obviously, the side setback is an issue, as is the rear. Let's just that's an option. It's just put the ball back in their court, and as opposed to flat out denying it, I guess.
Tip?
Thank you, Mike, because I had been sitting here thinking very much along the same lines. I think that that's fair all the way around. And as you said, gives the applicant the possibility, now that there's been this feedback, the opportunity to come up, having heard the feedback, with something that's more in keeping with the guidelines. So I would say I'm sympathetic to that idea.
Okay, and perhaps if we postponed it, we could also maybe ask Jeff Parker of what limits there are and what we can add as a condition. Because that, that might, a one-car garage pushed close to the house might be something I'd be comfortable with the rear setback, but putting a big hulking 28-foot wide garage that close to the neighbor, I don't think I will probably want to support. So it'd be, Michelle?
I was just going to mention that if that's something you did do, that would also give the applicant the opportunity to confirm the distance to the electric line, the radial versus vertical and horizontal, and that could give them a little wiggle room as far as what that front setback request might end up being. So that could work potentially, for them.
Okay, Jean?
I was gonna say, the only motions I'd be comfortable in making on this one is gonna be if we do a postponement, or is it a table? I know we've had
It's a
this come up
table
before.
because it's,
We're gonna table this, or we're gonna postpone it?
well, I think it's called tabling.
A
You
table,
were
okay.
corrected at one point.
I know I was corrected, so it's like, I don't know if I want to make this recommendation, because I'm not sure I know the right word to what I want to do. But I would be willing to make a motion to table these and have them come back after having heard our feedback, if everybody was agreeable to going ahead and tabling that.
Okay,
Do you want me to go ahead and make that motion?
sure. And for 1 month, 2 months, how do you want to do it? Maybe 2 months?
I'd suggest tabling it to the March 10th meeting.
Okay.
If they aren't ready
They may
and
want-
we don't get the information in
Right.
time, we can always postpone it again.
Okay,
Absolutely. So I'll make a motion to table variance 2103, 2104, and 2105 to the March 10th meeting. And with the input we've heard also from Michelle about getting the measurement on the electrical lines, and perhaps some different plans.
okay. Is there a second? We have a second? Okay, any discussion? And let's vote. All in favor of the motion? So this is tabled till the March 10th meeting.
Okay.
Okay, so next item of business is item 11, update regarding the Chapter 18 zoning code rewrite.
Hi there.
Hi.
Yeah, so, I was going to provide this update to you in March, but with the way some of the items have moved around on the agenda, it seemed prudent to go ahead and take advantage of this time and update all of you where we are on this project. We would like for the consultants to join this meeting, depending on the agenda and how heavy it is, either in March or April. And the purpose of that will be to have a dialogue with this group. What I do want to share is what we've been working on. So we, on a weekly basis, we have a working meeting with the consultants from Logan Simpson. And we have gone through and identified a number of items. And if you don't mind, I'd like to share my screen and show you some of the things we've been working on. What I'll start with is, really identifying, let's see, let me share my screen here. We'll start off with guiding principles. So we've spent some time. There you go. You should be able to see my screen now. We've spent a little bit of time looking at how other communities are approaching code rewrite, code update projects, and really what some of their successful guiding philosophies and thoughts have been. And so we've really combined that and put it together in this document, which is our guiding principles. You know, and we really have 10. And so, you know, at the beginning, of course, ensuring that the code is user-friendly. We want for anyone who uses this, whether it's staff, members of a board or commission, or the general public, an attorney, an engineer, to be able to utilize the code and not have to have a translator for every single thing they do. Item number 2 is making the right things easy. So, you know, there's some really interesting, and I think we'll really get into these conversations in the coming months. There's some really interesting modernization that's happening in code and making it easier to understand, balancing the flexibility with certainty. You know, I think the conversation that we've just had about these variances is a great example. You know, we need to know exactly what our capabilities are for making decisions, but also to have some flexibility, right, for the applicant as well as the neighborhood. Item 4 is engaging the public. We have a pretty robust plan. It's going to be an iterative process. You know, we're not going to have like 1 or 2 major public engagement events. With COVID, first of all, it's just about impossible to do something like that. And so what we're putting together are a set of, you know, almost like small town halls. Our first one is scheduled for February 25th. I'll be sending out an invitation to you guys. And what we're working on right now is, you know, how best to use the technology we have through Zoom. You know, maybe not everybody can come at a 3 o'clock or a 6 o'clock or a 7 o'clock. So, you know, doing something like having windows. So you could come in on the hour or the half hour. We'll do an introduction, and then you would be kind of whisked off. Zoom has this great ability to create rooms. And so then we can take that group and continue the conversation with them, small group discussion. So we're pretty robust there. We have a survey. I'll show that to you in just a minute. Our survey is going to launch in a week or so. We're just finalizing that. And the survey is going to be, again, just like those public meetings, they're not going to be just 1 or 2 and then you're done. We're going to use it as an opportunity to introduce the topics to our community, get people comfortable and familiar with these items so that they can kind of bite it off, right? Like an elephant, right? 1 bite at a time. You can't take it all in at once. So that's what we're going to do. You know, right sizing the standards and procedures, preserve and enhance local character. Obviously, that's super important to our community. So we're wanting to make sure that you know, certain parts of our code aren't just lifted, if you will, or plagiarized from another community, but it really does work for these quasi-judicial processes. Ensuring housing for locals, you know, we're working through what that means. That's a broad topic. Some of you who are involved in HAB and follow what HAB does, you know, this is a major priority for them. So we're working through what that looks like. I think that's going to have a pretty interesting conversation for us in the coming months. Sustainable development policies. Now, you know, we don't have strong guidance in our code around, for example, low impact design standards. We're not consistent in the region. It makes it challenging for developers or businesses who work in multiple communities. But at the same time, it needs to be something that really works for Manitou. Manitou likes green, we like sustainable, so we want our code to reflect that better. Avoid non-conformities. Boy, that's a real challenge for us. You know, we've already, just in the short time I've been here in a year with you all, that just seems to be such a challenge. How do we grow? How do we strengthen our community in a way that doesn't end up with, you know, 5 variances every single month or 3 variances for every single project that someone does? And then finally, provide enforceable tools. We do have some areas that are gray. We have some challenges trying to interpret how to apply the code to some situations. So we want to work through that. So, at the highest level, at that 40,000 foot elevation, what are our guiding principles? I'm going to pull up next for you. Okay, so then we're also building out, well, let's see, I'll go through this one first, our website. So we're building out on our website a page that's going to host information, how to get involved, where we're at in the process. This is a draft as of February 2nd. We're in the process of, we're still updating this. We probably will go live within the week on this, but just an introduction to the project, what it is. As you can see in here, you see some of the notes that we're still working through, the grammar and that sort of thing. Project description. We're going to include a calendar so that it's an easy one-stop shop to understand where we are in the process. We'll also have links to the current questionnaires that we've launched and we're collecting information on. We're going to address in here stakeholder interviews. There are a lot of stakeholders in our community, and how do we intelligently engage them? So we're going to have, we're working through this process right now, the stakeholder interviews. This is one we're still working on. We'll share information about public open houses. You'll see in here, it says February 18th. That was our initial date. We just made the decision today to go to February 25th to ensure we adequately advertise it in Pikes Peak Bulletin and through social media. And then of course we'll have, a document library. So it'll have easy access to the documents that we feel are important to the process. Are there any questions so far? I'm going to go next to the survey that we're about to launch.
No.
No? Okay. Okay, so let me then pull up the survey. That's website. Okay, here you go. So like I said, the process that we're going to go through to gather information, we're going to start off pretty broad, and this is to really help us understand a staff level, planning commission level, the consultant level, to just get an understanding of where the community is, what they're familiar with, how often they even use our code, reference it, think about it. We all live, breathe, and eat it every single day, but we recognize that's not the case for everyone. So as you can see in here, it's have you engaged in it? Are you aware of any projects or development in your neighborhood? Do you feel like zoning and subdivision titles are enforceable? What level of agreement or disagreement do you have with that? And then as you get towards that third column, of course, we're looking at parking requirements, use allowances, sustainability, natural resources, historic preservation, and what other broad topics are out there that we're not thinking of right now that members or stakeholders in the community think we need to be addressing. This is the first of several.
And how do you plan to distribute this questionnaire?
Sure, so it's going to be electronic. We've spent a lot of time thinking about how to do this. Logan Simpson has been very active in community engagement, community meetings, surveys, that sort of thing this last year in Colorado, including over in Colorado Springs. So they're pretty comfortable with our local community. So what we're going to do, we've engaged with Alex Treffy, the public information officer. He's working with us. We're going to, like I said, have this electronic. It's going to be hosted at the city's website. We'll be promoting it through a couple of different means. First of all, we have a pretty sizable email distribution list via Plan Manitou. I can't remember the number. It's pretty substantial. I mean, many hundreds. And so for our community our size, it's pretty good. We're going to be promoting this on social media. So Facebook, we'll send out links over Twitter. We're going to also drive traffic to the website through Pikes Peak Bulletin. We'll do some public advertising there, as well as Nextdoor. What we're going to do also, because we do recognize that there are some folks who would rather have a paper survey, it's just hard to get it to folks right now. So we will have some printed copies of the survey in the office. So if there is someone who wants to stop by or wants us to mail it to them, we could do that and gather the information that way.
Have you given any consideration to how to qualify respondents? Like, you know, we live right next to a 600,000 metro area.
Mhm.
And, you know, if we get 400 developers replying, how do we weigh that against citizens that live and have a stake already in Manitou?
You know, that's a really good point, and that's something we're actively talking about, how to ensure that we balance all of the input we're going to get in a way that favors Manitou Springs residents. You know, I can tell you, we just had we've been talking this week, for example, I'm going to pick on 6 El Paso. The vast majority of the comments that are coming in are not people who live in Manitou Springs. And, you know, we see that on some of these larger projects where, like you just said, Alan, these people don't even live in Manitou. So we're working through that. But we will make sure we identify that in the process.
Okay, because, you know, that's something we struggled with the
I know.
Hiawatha Garden.
Mhm.
We've had several surveys, and there are people in the community that, you know, challenge the validity of it. You know, even if we get 125 respondents, they'll say, oh, it doesn't count because they're self-selecting and blah, blah, blah. So it's, you know, there's always that challenge.
It really is. And I think an important part of this is for us to be open to and fully acknowledge all the stakeholders and go find those stakeholders, right? Not everybody's paying attention to the promotion we're going to do. You know, like I follow City Manitou Springs on Facebook, but I'll tell you, I never, ever see it come through my feed. Ever. And so, you know, I know that and I'm on Facebook probably every day or every other day. So I think I'm a pretty active user. So that's going to be a challenge for us to go out and identify those folks. You know, are they in certain church groups? Are they with the school district? Are they folks who, for instance, maybe support, you know, I think there's a distribution list of almost 50 people now, for example, with the Carnegie Library Project. You know, people who have different interests and stakes in the community. There are also, as you know, certain areas of town where residents are very activated and they want to be a part of this. And so that's going to require myself and the consultants and the rest of the planning staff paying attention to who's responding and who's engaging. And if we know there's someone out there who should care, making the effort to reach out to them and kind of bring them into the tent.
Okay.
Let's see. I think those were really the major items we've been working on. I mean, it's been pretty intense, you know. I mean, I'm probably spending 4 to 5 hours a week. I've been doing that since mid-December on this. Michelle, for example, I'm going to pick on Michelle right now. You know, Michelle has just a wealth of background and experience with using the municipal code, zoning code, you know, and she is providing insights on specific areas that are just a constant challenge or gaps that she identifies. Karen Birchtold, as our senior long-range planner, you know, she identifies some areas as well. Dylan is right there in the thick of it every single day, trying to make sense of it and from an operations standpoint, make it work. So, you know, the entire team has a lot of thought and input. And so, yes, Tip.
I think this is a good idea. The one thing that I think one other consideration that I think is going to be very important in talking about the stakeholders, as you put it, is that people have multiple identities. So, for example, when you do, I assume, some kind of questionnaire that people fill out so that you can start to think about what their positionality as a stakeholder. I think about, like, for myself, you know, that you might say, well, I'm in a certain income level. I own and I don't rent. I live in Agate Hill. I don't work in Manitou Springs. I'm white. I'm a certain age, you know, I'm 60 years old. And so that if you were aggregating the data, that there would be many places that I would be put in. And, you know, just being a business owner or something like that, that's not sufficient in capturing the data and weighing the different groups vis-a-vis one another. So I think it is going to take a pretty sophisticated tool if it's going to be meaningful to be able to figure out how to weigh the various interest groups as you put them, as you characterize them.
Absolutely. And we really have to be thoughtful about this. I mean, you guys all know that, you know, there's been attempts in the past, and some update processes have been very successful, some haven't been. And so, you know, I think if we approach this thoughtfully and not as a, you know, a chore, but thoughtfully, like you just said, Tip, identifying that we all represent different types of stakeholders in the community. And so, and no opinion is wrong, right? You know, I mean, we kind of need to hear from everyone on this. So, you know, we're looking at it as an iterative process. You know, the goal, as we've talked about before, the goal is really to hopefully have a pretty darn close final product to pass through council by December. You know, the next 3 months are a pretty heavy lift in terms of gathering information and our consultants translating that into some sort of usable format. So do y'all have any other questions or thoughts about this?
Christine, I don't want to say the obvious. I'm sure you'll do this, but when you launch this, you know, emphasize the why you're doing this and what's the goal. I mean, you've showed us kind of today the process, but you know, why are you doing this and what do you hope to accomplish is going to be huge.
Yeah, you know, that's a good point, because I think it's really easy for us who've been involved in this every day for months now. You know, we're in it. We know why, right? And it's just like every single day, but it's easy to lose sight of communicating that regularly. So that's a great point, Mike. Thank you.
And also, if you really want some good feedback, at least from us, maybe you can send out that documentation in advance so we can take a look.
Definitely. Definitely. Yeah, that's what I'm planning to do. Is where, as you can see, we're cleaning it up. We selected a logo, project logo. It's a variation of our city logo, you know, so I'll definitely get that out to you guys. And then as we launch the survey and have other, you know, relevant communication, obviously you guys are going to be at the forefront of it. This body is the most important body as we go through this process.
Jane.
I would just like to make a comment that going forward, one of the things that I think for me has been frustrating, because I've lived here too long, is, you know, we have to have a code, but it needs to have some teeth in it, because I can't tell you how many times. I mean, all I can tell you is that there's a bottling plant at one end of the town that has windows that were never approved, and all sorts of things that they did that were never approved through planning, and they got approval, and then they went through and did exactly what they wanted, which had nothing to do with the approval they got. We have a house at that same end of town that has an extra story on the top of it, and nobody made them tear it off, but they never got approval for that third story. They then came back and got their hands slapped by city council, like, oh, well, it was a mistake. And really, we don't know whose mistake it was. It's like, really? I think the way to solve that is to say, hey, our code has some teeth in it. You do that, and you can tear off the third floor. I mean, that's one of the things I think is most frustrating to me. Is I love having guidelines and rules, but I also think people have to follow them. And if we're going to have them, I want them enforced, because I've seen so many projects in this town where the approval was reasonable. What actually happened was not reasonable, but nobody had the guts to say, sorry, that's just going to have to be torn down. And I think even tonight, an example of something that needs a variance on 3 sides. I mean, that just seems a little bizarre to me. I mean, it's just, like I say, everything is a non-conforming or an oops, oh, I decided to do this. Well, I think, if we're gonna bother to do this, we have to put something in there that says the consequences. And maybe that's what we need. I know with some other things I deal with, we now have to state even on leases what the consequence is if you don't follow it. It's not just, well, you could be subject to legal, to litigation. It's, if you do this, here's the fine. Here's what's gonna happen.
Yeah.
So,
You're absolutely right. I mean, and there has to be a will. Like, we can put all this down on paper and there has to be a will to enforce it. I mean, man, last summer it was really hard. We all had the will from council, city administration, the planning department, code enforcement, the police department, Pikes Peak RV Park, to really clamp down on them and go through some serious enforcement action. And that was the first recommendation. And people said that as far back as they could remember, decades of ever
Right.
trying to bring business license revocation to council, all the way to council. And so there has to be a will to it also. So, if the product we deliver enables that will, then I think we'll be successful, because it can be hard.
because I think there have been a lot of sore feelings of people who followed the rules, and then they turn around and they see the next person. I mean, I can tell you on my own street that I would have loved to have had a metal roof, and there's a house 3 doors down from me that has a metal roof. And the reason it has one is because Michelle was on vacation, so they got away with a metal roof and I can't have it. Figure that out. It's like, just stuff like that.
Let's
It's like,
learn what Michelle's vacation schedule is.
exactly. But what I'm saying is that, of all the goofy things, it's like I've seen so many things happen that slipped through the cracks, or there was no there was no consequence if somebody did something that really wasn't allowed. It was like, oh well, it happened. Well,
Like for a 3-car pad.
yeah, I mean, I wanted to write in there that Michelle can never go on vacation, but that just didn't work.
Nope.
Yeah, it's definitely in the community, it's definitely easier to ask for forgiveness than permission. And
Yeah.
so if our code is updated in a way that's a little easier to follow and understand, it's easier for staff to administer. We've got good, clear guidelines when we come to quasi judicial bodies such as yours. Then I think it's going to make it easier. But yeah, I mean, it's just it's so much easier to ask for forgiveness than permission.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So speaking of that, I just, as a process thing that we could do now, I was thinking, like, one of the things I struggle with when I go look at a property is if there's a setback. And it's so, until you have to know where the property is, the pavement is not the edge of the property. And if we could require for things like setbacks, or like the 6 El Paso thing, if people are going to build, stake it out,
Yeah.
put 4 corners, have a pole that shows how high the buildings are. I think that kind of stuff can really help, if we could just do some of those little things, like, the one on Washington, I finally saw there was a stake that showed the corner, but it was really hard to really get my arms around exactly where the building pad footprint was. And that kind of stuff, just that's a lightweight way that I think we could at least make our job a little bit easier in the interim.
Good point. Good point.
So,
Good. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for letting me update you guys on where we are with it. And in the next couple of months, I think we'll be bringing the consultants to a meeting and just kind of setting aside some time, and they'll guide us. It'll be a guided conversation. And if you have any specific thoughts or areas of concern now that you want to, give me a call or shoot an email, that's totally awesome too. We're doing that at a staff level right now. Just kind of, Michelle laughs at me. I have all these sticky notes up on my bulletin board. Like, well, ever since I started with a year ago, I'm like, what? That doesn't work. And I write a sticky pad and throw it up on a billboard, so it's not billboard, but on a bulletin board. And, so it's just kind of informal right now, the way we're gathering information.
Great.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bless you too.
Okay, next is notice of council action. We can see that there if you want to highlight it, or any questions.
Think you all can read it, and if you've got questions, certainly ask them.
Okay, anything else? Then are we ready to adjourn? Then let's adjourn.
Yes, we are.
Okay.
So it was really nice to see all of you.
Thank you, guys. Oh,
Okay.
the little chocolate eaters waving at us.
That bad dog, the bad dog.
You hear that?
Thank you, guys.
Okay,
Bye.
bye.